You're sitting cross-legged on the carpet. The TV is on, but the sound is still coming up. That electric hum before the volume kicks in. Your backpack is somewhere behind you, kicked off by the front door. Your jacket is still half on. There's a bowl of something in your lap. Cereal maybe, or crackers. And the remote is on the couch above you, just out of reach. You do not need it yet. You know what's coming. 3:30 on a weekday afternoon in Canada in the 90s meant one thing. You were about to disappear into a world that had nothing to do with homework or chores or anything else your parents wanted you to think about. The screen flickers. The logos start. And for the next 2, maybe 3 hours, you are gone. This was before you could pick what played. Before you could pause or rewind or skip ahead to the good part. What came on, and you either watched it or you didn't. But you always did. Even if it was something you had seen before. Even if it was not your favorite. You watched because the TV was on, and being in front of it felt like the right place to be. It was not passive. It was a ritual. It was rhythm. It was the sound of childhood. The first thing you learned was the schedule. You did not write it down. You did not need to. It was in your body. You knew that if you got home by 3:30, you'd catch the tail end of one thing and the start of another. You knew that 4 o'clock meant a shift. That 4:30 brought something different. That by 5, you were in the home stretch before your mom called you for dinner. The shows were not just shows, they were markers. They told you where you were in the day, how much time you had left, how close you were to the end of your freedom. Why TV was the center of everything. It was not a channel you stumbled onto, it was the channel. You would turn the television on and flip straight there, bypassing everything else without even thinking about it. The zone. That is what they called the afternoon block, and it felt like exactly that. A zone. A place you entered. The hosts were there, standing in front of bright colors and weird angles, talking directly to you like they knew you. Like you were part of something. Phil, Sugar, Snit. They were not actors. They were not trying to teach you anything. They were just cool, older kids who got to hang out on television, and you wanted to be them, or at least be near them. When they introduced the next show, you believed them. You trusted them. They were your guides. ReBoot came on, and you leaned in without realizing it. The animation was different, sharper, computer-generated, in a way that felt futuristic, like you were watching something from a world that did not exist yet. Mainframe, sprites, the grid. You did not fully understand what was happening half the time, but that did not matter. You understood the feeling. Enzo's voice, Dot's confidence, Bob's calm. The villains felt genuinely threatening in a way that cartoons were not supposed to. You would sit there, chewing on your snack, and the room around you would fade. Your brother might walk by, your mom might be in the kitchen doing something. But you were inside the screen, inside the story. And when the episode ended, and the YTV logo popped back up, you would blink like you were coming out of a dream. Beast Wars came next, and this one hit differently. It was darker, weirder. Transformers, but not the ones your older cousins talked about. These were animals, robots that turned into animals, cheetahs and rats and gorillas. The computer-generated graphics were clunky, but you did not care. You cared about Optimus Primal's voice, about Megatron's scheming, about whether Dinobot was good or bad, or something in between. The plots were dense, probably too dense for kids, but you followed them anyway, piecing together alliances and betrayals, waiting for the moment when someone would say beast mode or maximize, and the transformation sequence would kick in. That sound, that mechanical whirring, you could hear it in your sleep. You did not watch these shows alone, even when you were the only one in the room. You watched them with every other kid in the country who was doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, and you knew it. You would go to school the next day, and someone would bring up last night's episode, and everyone would have seen it. Everyone would have an opinion. Everyone would remember the same moment. It made the world smaller. It made you part of something together. Sailor Moon came on and the energy shifted. The theme song started, and you knew every word, even if you did not sing along out loud. The animation was different, softer, more dramatic. The girls had giant eyes and impossible hair, and they cried a lot, and fought a lot, and transformed a lot. You were not supposed to like it if you were a boy, but plenty of boys watched it anyway. You were not supposed to take it seriously if you were a girl, but you did. Because it was not just a show, it was mythology. Usagi was not just clumsy and whiny. She was the Moon Princess. She had a destiny. And every episode built on that. The monsters of the day were repetitive, sure, but the relationships were not. The friendships, the rivalries, the romance that made you feel something you did not have a name for yet. When Tuxedo Mask showed up, you rolled your eyes, but you also kind of did not. You wanted to see what would happen. You wanted them to be okay. The commercials were part of the experience. You did not mute them. You did not leave the room. You watched them with the same attention you gave the shows, because they were talking to you. Toys you would never own, but desperately wanted. Creepy crawlers, easy bake ovens, moon shoes, those weird dolls that did one thing and cost $40, Frosted Flakes with Tony the Tiger, honeycomb cereal with that baffling claymation kid who was not quite human. You would see the same commercial 3 times in 1 hour, and it did not bother you. It was comforting, familiar. You knew what was coming. You could recite the jingles. Sometimes the commercials were better than the shows. And then there was channel surfing. You would grab the remote during a commercial break and flip just to see. CBC might have something. TVO if you were feeling educational, though you usually were not. CTV, global. You would land on The Simpsons and stay there even if you had seen the episode before. Homer's voice, Bart's laugh, the couch gag. You knew this world as well as you knew your own neighborhood. Better, maybe. You could quote entire scenes. Your parents did not love it. They would walk through the living room and sigh or make a comment about how you should be outside or doing your homework. But they did not turn it off. It was just what kids did. It was fine. You would flip back to YTV eventually. You always did. Dragon Ball Z had a different pull. It was slower. Every episode felt like it took forever, and that was part of the appeal. Goku would power up for 3 episodes straight, and you would watch every second of it. The screaming, the glowing, the muscles, the hair. It was ridiculous, and you knew it, but it worked. You cared whether he'd go Super Saiyan. You cared whether Vegeta would finally get his moment. The fights were endless, but you didn't want them to end. You wanted to live inside that tension, inside that build. And when someone finally threw a punch, when the Kamehameha wave finally fired, you felt it. Your whole body felt it. You'd sit there on the floor, and your legs would go numb, and you wouldn't notice. Your mom would call from the kitchen that dinner was almost ready, and you'd say, okay, without moving. One more episode. Just one more. The clock on the VCR said 5:47, but you weren't thinking about time anymore. You were thinking about whether Gohan would unlock his power, whether Piccolo would be okay, whether Frieza would ever actually be defeated, or if this was just going to go on forever. Yvon of the Yukon would come on sometimes, and you would forget it existed until it was suddenly right there in front of you. That weird French explorer, frozen long ago and now thawed in the present day. The animation was rough, the jokes were hit or miss, but it was ours. Canadian in a way that felt both specific and universal. You watched it because it was on, because it filled the space between the shows you actually cared about, because sometimes you did not need to love something to let it play. Recess ran on Teletoon, and it was a different vibe entirely. American, but it did not feel foreign. The playground politics were the same, the cliques, the kings of the jungle gym, the kids who ruled tetherball. TJ and his crew navigated Recess like it was a military operation. You saw yourself in it, or you saw kids you knew. The episodes were short and punchy, and by the time one ended, you were ready for another. You could burn through 4 in a row without blinking. Your little sister might wander in and sit next to you. She would not say anything. She would just watch. and you would not tell her to leave. This one was fine to share. Angela Anaconda came on, and it split people. You either loved it or thought it was the weirdest thing you had ever seen. The cutout animation, the real photographs for heads, the nasally voice, Nanette Manoir as the villain you loved to hate. It was ugly and strange, and somehow that made it compelling. You watched it and felt vaguely unsettled, but also unable to look away. It was on, so you watched it. That was the rule. Are You Afraid of the Dark was a different animal entirely. It came on later, when the sun was starting to set and the room was getting darker. You did not turn the lights on. That would ruin it. The Midnight Society sat around the campfire, submitted. For the approval of the Midnight Society, I call this story. And then you were in. The stories were genuinely scary. Not horror movie scary. Scary in the way that stayed with you. That made you think about them before bed. The ghosts, the curses, the pools that drained into nothing, the dolls that moved when you were not looking. You would watch with your hands over your eyes, peeking through your fingers. Your heart would actually race. And when it was over, when the fire was put out and the Midnight Society dispersed, you would sit there for a second in the quiet, letting your pulse settle. Then you would get up and turn the lights on, just in case. Sometimes you didn't care what was on. You'd turn the TV on and let it run in the background while you did other things. You'd build a Lego set on the floor. You'd flip through a comic book. You'd do half your math homework. The TV was just there, a presence, a companion. The voices filled the room, the music, the sound effects. It didn't matter if you were watching closely. It mattered that it was on, that the house wasn't silent, that you weren't alone. Your dad would come home, and the first thing he would say was, "You're still watching TV," and you'd say, "Yeah," because what else was there to say? He'd shake his head, but he'd also sit down on the couch behind you for a minute. He'd watch. He wouldn't admit he was interested, but he'd ask a question. Who is that guy? Why are they fighting? And you'd explain, even though he wasn't really listening, even though he'd get up a minute later and go do something else. For that minute, you were watching together, and that felt like something. The shows bled into each other. You couldn't always remember which episode was which season, which year. They all lived in the same space in your memory, the same feeling, the same light coming through the living room window, the same carpet under your legs, the same hum of the TV, the same sense that this was your time, your world, and no one could take it from you. By the time your mom called you for dinner, you'd been sitting there for 2 hours, maybe more. You'd stand up and your legs would ache, and you'd realize you hadn't moved, hadn't done your homework, hadn't gone outside, and you'd feel a little guilty, but not much, because this was what you were supposed to do. This was what being a kid meant. You'd turn the TV off, or leave it on if someone else was around, and you'd walk to the kitchen, and tomorrow you'd do it all again. Same time, same spot, same screen. You didn't know you were building a language, a shared vocabulary with every other kid who grew up in front of that same blue glow. You didn't know these voices and these stories would stay with you. That decades later, you'd hear a theme song and be transported, that you'd remember the room, the light, the feeling of having nowhere else to be. You were just watching TV, killing time, waiting for dinner. But somewhere in all those hours, in all those episodes, in all that time you thought you were wasting, you were becoming who you were. And the TV was there for all of it. Constant, reliable, always on, always waiting, always ready to let you disappear.